On today's show, we will talk about the legitimacy behind the Patrick Kane to Dallas trade rumors, talk about if Kane would be a good fit for the Stars, and if it would be worth the risk for him to join the team if the Stars were to pursue him. We talk about it all on a Monday episode of Locked On Stars.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, credentialed member of the Dallas Stars Media. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline.net is where the game starts. Whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener of the show, thank you for stopping by today's episode, for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe to our show on YouTube at the time of recording this. We are about 7 subscribers shy of 600. So if you like Dallas Stars content, especially daily in-season content covering the Dallas Stars, back to 3 episodes for the offseason, this is the place to be, uploading every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday until the start of training camp in late September. Thank you guys for the continued support of the show, even here in the offseason where things are slowed down, but there is still plenty to talk about in the world of the Dallas Stars, which one thing certainly that we will address later this week, John Klingberg, now a member of the Anaheim Ducks. We will be releasing an episode later this week with the Locked On Anaheim Ducks podcast to talk about that move and the implications for the Ducks, as well as the now hole on the Stars roster officially that Klingberg is now with another team and not the Stars. With that, of course, coming later in the week. What we're here to talk about today is a rumor, because you know this is the time of year where rumors and speculation come into play all over the NHL world, and I am a sucker for this kind of content and these kind of stories. And this all kind of started at the end of last week. Some rumors started to pick up that 3-time Stanley Cup champion Patrick Kane could be traded from the Chicago Blackhawks before the start of the NHL season, and that the Dallas Stars were heavy favorites to pursue him, according to the Cam and Strick podcast. And now, at least on Sunday afternoon, those rumors seem to have died down quite a bit, and even seem to have been debunked, according to Mark Lazarus of The Athletic. A few people on Twitter were sharing a tweet to me from Mark saying that those rumors don't appear to be true, and that really Kane has not necessarily expressed interest in being traded. It's just a matter of speculation of where the Blackhawks are as an organization right now, and a player of Kane's pedigree, where he's been and what he's done in his career, that it's likely that no one would be surprised if he wanted to pursue other options. So while this rumor seemingly might not be true right now here in late July, early August, it certainly is something worth speculating, because for that very reason, a guy like Patrick Kane, who is no doubtedly a Hall of Famer by the time his career ends, he could probably retire right now and be a pretty shoe-in for the Hall of Fame. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. But I don't think it's too far, out of reach to assume that there's a good chance that he could be moved before the start of this NHL season, because the Blackhawks are seemingly diving headfirst into a full rebuild, and there's plenty of speculation about Kane and Taves, kind of the 2 remaining pieces of the Blackhawks of the early 2010s that were one of the best teams in the NHL year after year. There's a lot of questions about their future with the franchise, whether or not they could be on their way out of town with their contracts expiring at the end of this coming season. And, there's the question of, do the Blackhawks want to let them finish out their time in Chicago, or would they want to trade them away and try to establish some better capital for the future, whether that be prospects, whether that be draft picks, or other young and up-and-coming NHL players. Patrick Kane is a competitor, and like I said, a guy that is going to be a Hall of Famer one day once his career is over. And you would think that maybe having a player like him on the roster, as weird and as dumb as this might sound, it could really kind of throw a wrench in some of the Blackhawks' plans. Having a guy as talented as Kane is, even at his age at 33, the Blackhawks could accidentally win some games. They could mess around and actually win a game. The thing that fans pay money to go to games to see their teams win. The Blackhawks likely won't be doing a ton of winning just because of their roster, but also I'm sure that they would be more than thrilled to get the number 1 overall pick for the 2023 NHL draft. And having really talented players on the roster might mean you win some games that you probably don't want to, because it could affect where you stand in the lottery and overall where you would be picking in next year's draft. So if Kane does get traded, it would certainly take quite a bit of work, and it's not something that you can speculate a ton of teams, because he does have a no movement clause on his contract, meaning that he would have to grant permission for the trade. He could choose to stay with the Blackhawks, and the Blackhawks would not be able to do anything about it. If he wants to get traded, Patrick Kane would kind of have to get the ball rolling and say, hey, I wouldn't mind playing for this team, or I would want to go play in this city with this team. And then the Blackhawks would be able to try to formulate some sort of deal to get what would likely be a pretty hefty return, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, speculating on that for Patrick Kane. And also, the Blackhawks would likely need to eat up a good chunk of Kane's salary, regardless of where he gets traded, because he is set to make $10.5 million next season. And there's several teams in the NHL that would not be able to inherit a contract that big, including the Dallas Stars, especially since they're, at least at the time of recording this on Sunday afternoon, still have yet to re-sign Jason Robertson and Jake Ottinger, which will take up a good majority of the rest of their cap. And, if the Stars were to make a move like this, they would have to re-sign those two players and then probably send some other NHL players back to Chicago in return in order to offset the balance there and make sure the Stars aren't over the cap. And I have to imagine that this would be, a potentially appealing destination for Kane. We obviously don't know what NHL players are thinking all the time, or what they want, to do next, or what their next move could be. But, I would think it'd be pretty, appetizing, appealing for Patrick Kane to think about teaming up with, one of the better teams in the Western Conference and some of the best American talent in the NHL. Patrick Kane, without a doubt, one of the best American NHL players in the league today, and of course, of all time. Certainly up there with some of the best names like former Dallas Stars legend Mike Modano, but even in today's NHL, the Stars boasting some of the best talent in hockey from the States. Joe Pavelski, Jake Ottinger, Jason Robertson, and even another teammate on Team USA of his, Ryan Suter, who exists on the Stars. Certainly not up to the caliber of the three aforementioned players in Pavs, Ottinger, and Robertson, but still a ton of connection there. Guys, some of them like Suter and Pavelski, that he's kind of grown up with and climbed through the ranks with. He was a little bit younger than those guys, but still has that connection with them and probably has some really good relationships established on this team. And again, this is, a city in Dallas, a team in Dallas that's looking to be competitive this season and make a deep playoff push. And you would have to think a guy like Patrick Kane could help take a team that is ready to, make the playoffs and maybe make some noise in the first round or maybe the second round and take them to being a legitimate threat in the postseason. But we're going to squeeze in a quick break, and when we come back, we will talk about the benefits of Patrick Kane joining the Stars and what he could bring to the table if he was a new member of the team. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs and find all of your favorite sporting events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live betting, scores, and podcasts. Head to the BetOnline website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action happening around the sports world. BetOnline.net, where the game starts. We are moving on this Monday episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for making us your first listen of the day. Continuing to talk about Patrick Kane. Seems like some of the rumors about him coming to Dallas have been debunked, but of course we love to speculate about the future on this show, so that is what we are doing. Talked about what it would take for Patrick Kane to potentially leave Chicago, why he would want to leave Chicago and potentially come to a city like Dallas. But now we ask the other question at the other end of the spectrum. Why would the Dallas Stars want Patrick Kane? As far as, his hockey playing ability, he's still very good at the game. And, it's very interesting because I asked on Twitter what Stars fans thought of the idea of the trade even happening. Just really asked for the thoughts on the rumor. Didn't say, do you want him? Do you not want him? Asked what people's thoughts on the rumors were. And there were very mixed responses. Plenty of people who said that, they would love to have a guy who's a 90-point player, a guy who's one of the still better forwards in the league, maybe a top 20 forward in the NHL, despite being an older veteran in his mid-30s. And then there were people, I think one person literally says they would rather gouge their eyes out than see Patrick Kane wear the victory green, even though I'm almost certain that person was an Avalanche fan based on their Twitter bio. So maybe that's more of they don't want to see Kane in a Star sweater because of the implications that it would mean for the Avalanche. So who's to say? But like I said, very mixed responses from the Stars community on Twitter. Some people not wanting Kane, some people thinking that he would be a fine addition to the team. And as far as on-ice talent, like I said, Patrick Kane, still a fantastic player, still a very solid player. In 78 games last season, he scored 26 goals, 66 assists, totaling 92 points. And he did that on the Blackhawks, the Chicago Blackhawks of 2021-2022, one of the worst teams in the NHL. The Blackhawks that didn't record a win last season until their 10th game, one of the worst starts from any team in the league last season outside of maybe the New York Islanders, but they played, their first 17 games of the season on the road. The Blackhawks did not win a game until their 10th game of the season, and were just consistently one of the worst teams in the league, just due to the lack of talent that is on their roster, and that is, of course, why they are now full-on embracing this tank for the next several seasons, for the foreseeable future. So, Patrick Kane still putting up those elite numbers. I mean, 92 points is great for any player, despite their age or what they've done in this league. But to do it at age 33, when you've been in the league for a while, on one of the worst teams in the league, is not a small feat, and certainly not something that many players could do. It's just crazy to see that, how long he's been playing. He's a guy that has stayed relatively healthy. He's a pretty historically healthy player, which I think is huge. I know that the Stars are at their best when their team is fully healthy. That can be said for any NHL team, but we obviously saw it with the Stars. They made the Stanley Cup, and then the next season were just absolutely ravaged by injuries and missed out on the playoffs this past year. Relatively healthy for the most part, made the postseason, put up a really good fight in round one. And it's no question that Patrick Kane could come in and be a shoo-in for a top 6 role here in Dallas, if not even on the top line. I know many people have already started fantasizing about a potential all-American top line with Robo and Pavelski. Could be really exciting, but also, you have to wonder if the coaching staff would even want to break up the top line and move Roope Hintz down to the second. It would all, again, depend on what Pete DeBoer and the coaching staff would want to do. But it's certainly exciting to think about Mason Marchment, a guy that could probably fit in on the top 6 somewhere, could probably play somewhere on the third line, which is exciting because of the game that he brings, but just, getting to move more talent down the roster where you still have the opportunity for secondary scoring is really intriguing when you can have a guy who's as experienced and as talented as Patrick Kane playing maybe even second line minutes alongside Tyler Seguin. I think that could be a very interesting combo and could be a really fun duo that could build some very solid chemistry with one another. And then, of course, we talk about it all the time on the show, how valuable veteran experience is. Like I said, this is a guy who has won just about every award you can win in the NHL, including the Stanley Cup, the Hart Trophy, the Art Ross, the Calder Trophy. I mean, this guy has been around for a while and could bring some great veteran insight to the ice to help, propel this Stars team forward and take them to the next level. He can still score goals. He can still help play make and be a very effective member of the offense, and can maybe even see some time on the power play, which I think the Stars need as much help as they can get on the man advantage, and having a player of Kane's pedigree certainly would be a step in the right direction at righting the wrongs on the man advantage for the Stars. This would help the Stars be taken more seriously by the NHL world, and especially teams in the Western Conference. This would be one of those those moves that takes you from maybe a first-round team and a first-round exit team to a team that could legitimately make it to the conference finals. I know that sounds crazy to say, but I mean, you saw the numbers Patrick Kane put up last season with one of the worst teams in the league. Can you imagine the damage that he could do on a competent team with a competent roster and a seemingly right now competent coach in Pete DeBoer, who has had very good success early on with his new teams? It's a very exciting idea to think about. And, the Stars could also look to maybe move some other players that are taking up some cap space, whether it's a guy like Anton Hudobin or Radek Faksa, something that could intrigue the Stars to help clear up some roster space. Bring in a guy like Kane, maybe even is only one season. The Stars kind of are in a win now mode. You dump some of those other contracts. You maybe have Kane for only a season, but then you're able to move on and maybe have a little bit more money in your pocket the following offseason and next summer, if, whether or not you go far in the playoffs or not. So always something to be thinking about. With that, the pieces that would be going back to Chicago. We'll talk about that in just a second because there is a lot there, and that's really my biggest hesitancy with all of these rumors and all of this speculation. But we'll talk about that after another quick break. All right, we're closing out this Monday episode of Locked On Stars, closing the idea of Patrick Kane coming to Dallas, potentially. Again, some of these rumors seem to be debunked. Still a really intriguing idea to think about. Just a guy of his talent and a guy who's been around this league this long. But with that said, he would demand a pretty hefty return, a pretty hefty price tag to get him to go to any team, including Dallas. And I think that is the biggest downside of this move if it were to happen, if it started to gain any traction, that the Stars would have to give up a lot and maybe a little bit too much. And it might be one of those trades that in the end, they might be seen as the losers of the deal. Like I said, they could potentially send some NHL players, whether it's Radek Faksa, Anton Hudobin. I've even seen, back when the rumors were kind of gaining a little bit of traction, that Denis Gurianov could potentially be a piece that's sent to Chicago because he still has a little bit of youth and still has quite a bit of upside. But if you ask me, that just is another Val Nichushkin situation waiting to happen. But the real damage, I think, would potentially be done in the prospect pool as far as the Stars. You would have to imagine for, in return for a player like Kane, that the Chicago Blackhawks would be looking for a Johnston, Stankoven, or Bork type of player. And this would be an incredibly risky move for the Stars. Kane is still a good player. He had 92 points last season, still contributing at a high level, even on not very competitive teams. And he might be good next season, or maybe even, 2 or 3 seasons down the road, if the Stars were to get him and were to proceed with him down the line and sign him to a new deal. But, he could fall off. He could really start to decline. He could get injured. He could retire. Who knows what could happen with a guy who's at this point in his career like Patrick Kane. And, these top 3 prospects, Wyatt Johnston, Logan Stankoven, and Maverick Bork, still in development and still guys that, the city of Dallas, the organization, and the rest of the NHL world seems to believe that their best days are truly ahead of them, and they could be, game-changing type players that can contribute and be, great teammates on any NHL roster. And I think that that's kind of what the Stars envisioned when they drafted them. And as of right now, that seems to be the plan for those 3 players in the future, for them to be here long-term and for them to be heavy contributors for the Stars going forward for the next several seasons that can help you win a plethora of games. So I'm not really sure if it would be worth it to make that move unless you were just absolutely guaranteed that getting a player like Kane would guarantee you a Stanley Cup, which obviously that's not possible. You can't predict what the future would hold for making a deal like this, but the Stars would probably have to surrender some draft picks as well, which would make it kind of a double whammy situation where you're giving up probably one of your best prospects, and then you're probably giving up a first-round pick in 2023, or maybe a second-round pick. But I have to imagine, again, with a guy with the pedigree of Kane, that they would want some of the higher draft picks that they could acquire. Then you get rid of your first-round pick, and it makes it more difficult to replace a top prospect like Stankoven, Bork, or Johnston. So a heavy, heavy price would have to be paid to move a player like Patrick Kane anywhere. But Dallas, they're kind of in this weird spot where they have a really good amount of talented NHL players, some talented prospects that Maybe one of them will crack the roster this season. Likely, only one of them will. We might see Bork at the AHL level. I feel like that's likely where he'll start his season. And then Stankoven and Johnston, it's kind of a toss-up to see how they'll do, and at the Traverse City tournament, how they'll do at training camp, so on and so forth. And, they could end up being even better than we expect them to be, which is very good. And they could really go on to potentially be franchise players. I mean, we've seen how they played at the CHL level in juniors, and the potential is certainly there. So is it worth it to give up a player like that could really be a game changer for your franchise in return for a guy that's still good, not as great as he once was, and probably going to be on the decline? Is it worth it? I don't really think so. Again, it would be exciting, and I think a fun storyline to talk about, Suter, Pavelski, and Kane all on one team, this older generation of great USA hockey players ushering in this new generation, and Robertson and Ottinger, and there could probably be some really great moments with Kane on the team, but I would imagine the Stars would have to give up a very big haul, whether it's draft picks, prospects, current NHL players, and the risk just might be too heavy, because even with that move, like I said, I think the Stars could be competitive. They could make a legitimate run at the Western Conference Finals, but the rest of the West is still going to be incredibly stacked with teams like the Colorado Avalanche, and even really just the Central Division in general is going to be difficult to navigate, with teams like Nashville making some pretty good moves this offseason, St. Louis making solid moves, Minnesota, who knows how they're going to be this season. We've talked about them at length on previous episodes. The Central Division will not be a cakewalk this season. So there's no guarantee that even if you get a guy like Kane, that really does take you to being a true Stanley Cup competitor. But we know that that's what the Stars want to do this season. You have to know that going into this year, it's got to be Stanley Cup or bust for this crew. Whether or not Patrick Kane is there or not is yet to be determined, and maybe all this, after it's been debunked, maybe all of this will die down. It won't ever get brought up again, and he stays in Chicago and either re-signs with them again or goes off somewhere else. Only time will tell. But be sure to let me know in the comments down below, if you're watching on YouTube, if you would be interested in seeing Patrick Kane to the Dallas Stars, or if you just want to see the team stay as it seems to be set right now. Thank you guys for tuning into today's episode of Locked On Stars, for making us your first listen of the day. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on YouTube as well as your favorite podcasting platform. Remember that we are free and available no matter where or how you choose to listen. We will be back here on Wednesday with a crossover episode with Locked On Anaheim Ducks to talk about Klingberg's time in Dallas and also talk about his future in Anaheim, and again, the implications for both the Ducks franchise and the Stars going forward. But we'll see you there, Stars fans. Have a great Monday.